Are you looking for inspiration on a daily basis? Then check out Deal to Heal Teas. With our inspirational teas, you're sure to find something to inspire you. That's dealtohealteas.com. Put some inspiration in your situation. Wear inspirational tea and be inspired all day. Let's go to dealtohealteas.com. Again, that's dealtohealteas.com. Hey guys, if you're enjoying this podcast, then I know you'll enjoy the Girl Dad Discussion podcast. I'm your host, Ernest James, and I believe the relationship between a daughter and her father is one of the most important relationships a young lady can have. And therefore, my mission is to promote the daddy-daughter relationship by sharing the voices of girl dads to the world. So check out our podcast on every platform where podcasts can be listened to. And if you want to watch the podcast, check us out on our YouTube channel. Again, that's the Girl Dad Discussions podcast with your host, Ernest James. Hey guys, this is Ernest James, host of the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. And I got a question to ask you. Could you buy me a cheeseburger? Better yet, could you buy me a value meal? Yes? Well, guess what? I don't need a value meal. However, for the cost of a value meal, you can support this podcast to keep us on the air. Just go to Patreon/Deal to Heal podcast and choose any one of the 3 tiers that's available. And if you just want to make a one-time donation, go to Cash App and make a donation to $EJames, the number 418. Make a one-time donation to the Cash App, or again, go to Patreon to support this podcast and keep us on the air. Thanks in advance. Be blessed. Welcome to Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. On this podcast, my guest and I will discuss topics and ways to help us to heal in every area of our lives. I believe that everyone can live a life that is happy, healthy, and whole. So I'm on a mission to help people to deal, heal, and fulfill. Deal with your problem, heal from the pain, and fulfill your purpose. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get to it. Welcome to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. I am your host, Ernest James, and I believe that everyone can and should live a life that is whole, healed, and healthy. And therefore, I'm on a mission to help people to deal, heal, and fulfill, to deal with your problems, to heal from the pain, and to fulfill your purpose. Thank you guys once again for tuning in to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. If you haven't already, make sure that you listen, like, subscribe, and share to our podcast on all of our social media platforms and your podcast listening platforms. But I really want you guys to check out our new YouTube channel because our channel has changed. It is no longer the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast, but it is now the Deal to Heal podcasting network, right? Because as you already know, on the YouTube channel, there is the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast, as well as our partner podcast, the Girl Dad Discussions podcast, which we'll talk about in a second. But there are also other podcasts and productions that are coming your way, and they will all be able to be found on our new podcasting network. So again, subscribe to our new YouTube channel, the Deal to Heal podcasting network. All right. Thank you guys in advance for that. And make sure that you're checking out our partner podcast, which is the Girl Dad Discussions podcast with myself as your host. That is also on our new YouTube channel. So if you go there now to the Deal to Heal with the Deal to Heal podcasting network, you will find the podcast and playlist for the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast, as well as the Girl Dad Discussions podcast with E. James, who I am your host for that also. Another thing, I'm going to tell you guys how you can win $100 from the podcast, right? I'm gonna tell you how you can win $100 from the podcast, but you have to stay until the end in order to get that information. So wait until the end of the episode, and I will give you the information of how you can win $100 from the podcast. Now, our product of the week. As you guys know, we are a self-sustained podcast, and the way that we stay on the air and pay our bills is by bringing you amazing products for you to purchase in order to support our podcast. So our products, because we have two of the week this week, is our purpose journal, our new purpose journal. I'm see, can let you see them. All right, for those that are watching on YouTube, we have our purpose journal and our purpose planner. That is both are out now for purchase on Amazon. The links will be in the description below. Again, I'm a big person that believes in having a plan for your life, right? And the way that you plan for your life is journaling to know where you're at and where you've been. And then the planner is for where you're going. All right. So make sure you guys go to the description, the links in the description to find out where you can find our products of the week, which is this week, which is our purpose planner and purpose journal. So thank you guys for that. Now we're going to jump right in because today, just like any other day, we are blessed with the guests. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Ernest. How are you going?
I am good. I didn't want to say your name because I didn't. I usually ask first to make sure I pronounce it right, but I didn't ask, and so I didn't want to just jump out there and say the wrong thing. So do me a favor, introduce yourself to me and to your list and to the listeners, and tell us a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do.
It's more than okay because it's often the most mispronounced surname I've ever come across. So, at least in my life. So, my name is Simon Rinnie. I'm a men's mental health advocate. I'm a social worker and therapist as well. I also host my own podcast, the Mindful Men podcast, and I'm all about inspiring guys to pause and reflect about what's going on in their life. And a lot of that for me is around mental health discussions, around alcohol misuse, around fatherhood, all that type of stuff, and hope that we can inspire them to make meaningful change in their lives. So hopefully if they stick around to the end of this episode, maybe go into the draw for that $100, I'll be sticking around to the end of the episode.
Right.
They'll hear hopefully some words of wisdom that can, get them on their own healing journey as well. Because that's why we do podcasting, to share stories and hopefully inspire someone out there to make meaningful change. So yeah, that's what I do in a nutshell. And if you haven't quite worked out the accent yet, I am from Australia. So across the big blue. It is 10 o'clock in the morning here. So although it looks really dark in my bedroom that I'm recording from, that's what a podcast is live. But yeah, all the way across from Australia.
All right. All right. So one of the things that I do know, Simon, because I asked before we started recording, is that you are a girl dad. So whenever I have girl dads on, I start off with two questions straight off the bat. Number one, what does it mean for you to be a girl dad? And what is something that your daughter has taught you?
Interesting. Yeah, like we've got two kids. We've got a boy and a girl. So the girl's second and she's only 4. And the boy, his name's Gus. Gus is 7 years old. And my daughter's name's Pippa as well. And so when we had Gus, we actually thought it was going to be Pippa. So I had Pippa named out from day one. I told my wife, this is the name. We're having a girl. It's going to happen. And then Gus popped out. And I'm like, oh, okay. And it was still beautiful because we love our Gussie and he's an amazing boy. But to then go around a second time and have a daughter and have Pippa come out was just an amazing feeling. So it was amazing because I grew up in a household of 4 boys. So mum and dad gave birth to a sister for me, but she passed away a year before I was born. So I never got to meet her, never got her to be in my life or anything like that. So all I knew growing up was boys. So to become a father of a girl was a really nice thing to bring in female energy into the house. And in terms of what so it means the world to me to start with, but in terms of what I've learned about myself since having a daughter is that she's a lot more feisty than my son and she keeps me on my toes a lot more and she has a lot more attitude. So anyone who says that a boy has all those traits, yes, they do, but your daughter could have those traits to the next level. So she's always keeping me on my toes, but we absolutely love both our son and our daughter. But it is nice to have a daughter in my life, a girl in my life. That's not my wife. So
Right, right. All right. So I'm sort of on the opposite side of what you said. So I have three brothers, so it's four boys, but I have five sisters. And so
wow.
nine of us all together. So yeah, I was lucky in that sense. So I was around a lot of girls. But yeah, I'd love to have that ask those questions. And for all you guys that's listening, if you even think that those just the answer to those two questions was great, you definitely want to follow the Girl Dad Discussions podcast, because we have discussions like this all the time with other girl dads talking about raising our daughters and our relationship with our daughters. And also, we started to have daughters on also. So now the daughters get to come on and talk about the relationships with their fathers. So you make sure you guys go and check that out. Again, that's I was going to say the deal to heal. That is Girl Dad Discussions with E. James on all of your podcast listening platforms, or just go over to YouTube so you can hear it and watch it. Go to the Deal to Heal Podcasting Network and you'll find us there. So we're going to jump right back into it. So Simon, you mentioned it about you being a mindful coach for men, and being a therapist. So tell us a little bit about your story that made you even say, you know what, this is the route I want to go, even to be a therapist, first of all, but then not only to get into therapy, but then say, okay, I really want to focus on helping men, with their mindfulness.
Yeah, it's a long story, so I'll try to give you the key highlights for that story, because it goes over 40 years. So to give it some context, so I grew up in a place called Adelaide, South Australia, and the suburbs that I grew up were the lower socioeconomic suburbs of that city. Is where there's a lot of unemployment, a lot of welfare. There's a lot of single parent households. The jobs that you would have would be like in manufacturing. So there was a car manufacturing plant near where I lived. Or you might be like, mum was a cleaner, for example. Dad worked at the local council. These aren't high-end jobs that are going to make you a lot of money. And so if we set the context, it's an environment that's probably lower to middle class in terms of what it looks like. And it was in the 80s and 90s. So I'm an 80s baby. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. So it's a land before social media and internet and phones and all this type of stuff. And so what it meant to be a boy and then to become a man was really defined by that environment. So it's defined by the conversations we'd have around the dinner table, which were certainly not mental health discussions. It was all around how hard are you working at school or in your job, or what adversity are you overcoming without any help? Your boys and your men in the household. How are you sucking it up? How are you carrying on? How are you showing your worth to the world? And this was the same discussion in a lot of households in that era, and in fact that age as well. And a lot of my friends were having similar conversations as well. But the thing is, we never knew about it until we were older. Everything was always hush hush. It was kept quiet. You didn't talk about this type of stuff in public. And that was reinforced, at home, but it was also in the schoolyard as well. So, if a bully started picking on you, you've got to be that boy and that man and be tough and go into that like you're like not scared, even though you might be absolutely fearing for your life in that moment. Because if you showed sign of weakness, you'd become the target. You'd be bullied. You'd be told that you're a girl, or you're a sissy, or you're gay. All these types of things, and you would be targeted and targeted and targeted. And it was reinforced on the sports field. So I grew up in a household full of alpha male boys. Right. So we were jocks. We played Australian rules football. We played basketball. We played soccer. We did track and field. Everything we did was centered around sport. And to succeed in sport, you've got to be tough. You've got to put your emotions aside and perform and perform and perform. So again, it's reinforced there. I had to focus on the game, not on the emotional well-being or the thoughts that were going through my head. Because if I did that, I get distracted and I wouldn't perform at a elite level, which I was, probably in the upper echelons of the teams that I played in as well. And then it was reinforced in what we watched on TV. And so I mentioned having older brothers because they dictated what was on TV. And we're talking about The Terminator, Die Hard, Rambo, I think Predator was around, and so it was very alpha male, hyper masculine. The hero is Arnold Schwarzenegger or Bruce Willis, and they're getting stabbed or shot, and they're walking through walls of fire and all this type of stuff. And quickly, very quickly, that's what I learned to be a boy and a man, was to be tough and to suck it up and to carry on no matter what wound you've got, to carry on. And leading up to my 8th birthday, Mum would always say, Simon, you're a really happy-go-lucky kid. Nothing phases you. You're always smiling, you're always laughing, you're always telling jokes. This is great. I love it. And I loved that when Mum would say that. That made me feel really good. But everything changed in my life when I turned 8 years old. And I remember being in the schoolyard, and a student said to me, Simon, if you stop using your voice for more than a minute, you're going to lose your voice forever. Now, most people would hear that and go, that's just rubbish. I'm not going to listen to that. There's no truth behind those words whatsoever. But the 8-year-old version of me believed that other student in the schoolyard. And so this is where this condition called obsessive compulsive disorder entered my life. And so for anyone who's not sure what that is, it's often known as OCD. And it's often very misunderstood. And so for anyone who's not sure what it actually is, OCD starts with an obsessive thought. So for me, it was the thought of losing my voice. And now that was really distressing for me, because I was that happy-go-lucky kid that was always joking, smiling, laughing. What happens if I lost my voice? It would be the world's worst thing for me. And then also it becomes what we do to alleviate that obsessive thought, the intrusive thought, is we have to perform what's called a compulsive behavior. So this is the C in OCD. And so for me, it was every minute I had to check that my voice still worked. And so I had to do this by using my voice and using my vocal cords, and I would do this by humming. So every minute or so, I'd go like this, just checking, is my voice still there? Because if it's there, I'm good. I'm safe. My voice is not going to get lost. And if I hadn't done that in a minute or so, I'd start to really freak out and get really anxious and stressed. And so I start going like that, really quiet, but really quietly. And so nobody ever said to me, Simon, what is that noise that you're doing? Why are you making that noise? And I did this for about 1.5 to 2 years, just quietly to myself, humming to myself. And so OCD becomes a disorder because it starts to have a profound impact on your life. And you do it for the diagnostic criteria is over an hour a day of your life. And I'm doing this all the time, this humming thing. And then it slowly evolved over time. So fast forward to around 13 years, and Mum and Dad separated. So we became that single parent household. And me and my little brother, we moved out with Mum. I remember coming home and she had packed all of our stuff into garbage bags. She'd filled up her car and she took us to this new house. And she says, boys, this is where we're living now. I can't live with your father anymore. It's just not working. Your 2 older brothers, they can deal with themselves. They're going to stay with Dad. But you 2 are coming with me. And back then there was this notion of having a man of the house as well. And so I put it on myself. Nobody asked me to do this, but I put it on myself saying, well, I'm 13. I'm the oldest male in the house. Now I've got to be the protector. I've got to keep everyone safe and help Mum around the house. I've got to be that man of the house. And this is where OCD really turned for me. It went from just this humming, quirky little thing that I laugh about now that I don't do it anymore. I haven't done it since I was 10 or so. But this is where OCD really ramped up. And every night, to feel safe and to make sure everyone was safe, I would go around the house and I would check the front door. Then I'd check the front windows. I'd make sure the blinds are perfectly closed. I'd go around every window, every door, and make sure it was Fort Knox, basically. You could not get in, and you couldn't get out, really, but you could not get in. And because I had this obsessive thought that someone was going to break into our house, steal our things, kidnap us, kill us, or hurt us really badly every single night. And I guess this was reinforced by kind of like that environment that I grew up in. There's a bit of crime around. You wouldn't walk around at night time. It can feel very unsafe. And particularly for me with this OCD brain, it felt extremely unsafe. And so I would do this for 2, 3, maybe 4 hours every night as a 13-year-old going around the house. And what would happen is I'd check the house. I'd check all these things. I'd go to bed and my brain would say, Simon, did you really check that window? I'm like, okay. So then I start thinking, oh no, I didn't check the window. I didn't check that door. Or maybe in the process of checking the window, I've accidentally opened it and forgot about that. And so it creates an entry point into the house. And so I'd get out of bed and go do it again. But I wouldn't just go to that window, it would be the whole house over again, because an OCD brain has to do things in a pattern. So I'd have to go to certain doors and certain windows in a pattern. So it's always the pattern is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's an order to everything. And to add some extra pain to that process, I also had this obsessive thought that the house was going to burn down while we were sleeping. And so I would have to check the irons off and the stoves off and the ovens off. And we had this big old 70s or 60s fridge that had this massive seal on it that was like literally an inch thick. It was really old school. And but the seal was coming off as well. And so if the door wasn't closed properly, it can sometimes just pop open. Now, the 40-year-old version of my head goes, oh, well, the food will just go off, like it's fine. The 13-year-old version of me thought and believed that if that door was slightly open, it would cause the motor to overheat and catch on fire and burn the house down. And so I'd add those elements into my checking as well. And so this was going on from 13. This started for me, and I've experienced that ever since. I'm 40 years old now. I don't do that for 2, 3, 4 hours, but I'd certainly get up and down out of bed, and my wife just goes to sleep now. She knows it's part of my OCD. But for 20 years, I didn't know that was OCD. I dealt with this in silence. I didn't tell anybody. I didn't go and see a therapist. I didn't talk to a GP. I didn't talk to my parents. I kept this buried deep down inside, and I did this a lot at night time, so nobody ever saw it. I would do it when I left for the house for the day, and go back. And when I got my driver's license, I might drive 20 minutes and then have to drive home because the OCD's got kicked into gear and gone, Simon, did you really lock that front door? You better go check it because you could get home to someone in the house, or your stuff's gone, or the place is burnt down, or whatever. For 20 years, I lived with this undiagnosed. Around 15, I found alcohol. And like most young men and young women as well, I've heard women talk about this as well. It starts off as socializing. We're doing it because all of our friends are doing it. It's fun. But what I came to realize is that alcohol obliterated my OCD. So it stopped me thinking. It enabled me to feel normal for a couple of hours a night. And I hung on to that. I loved that about alcohol. And in fact, I would drink so much that, some nights I'd pass out, do some crazy stuff, but I just loved that feeling of slowing that brain down and not thinking and not feeling. As I became an adult, that became a problem, and it started to become more and more of a problem 20 years into this OCD process. And my now wife encouraged me to go get help. And for 2 years, I said, no, I don't need help. If you want to talk about our issues, you can go see someone. So I deflected like a lot of guys do. But after 2 years of her encouraging me, I finally thought, you know what, maybe she's right. I've been drinking too much. It's getting out of hand. I also do this other weird thing with drinking. This is another element of OCD is what's called pure obsessions. So I would drink and I would get drunk, and then the next day I would wake up and I wouldn't have a hangover, but I would start an OCD process that's in overdrive. And so it would try to replay the night's events from the night before over and over and over again, because what it's trying to do is to make sure I was safe. So I was looking for any instances of me maybe offending somebody in a conversation, or doing something that's going to put my job at risk, maybe because it was Friday night drinks. So I got up on a table or something and danced. And is the boss going to see that and pull me into his office or whatever and get in trouble? I would replay the night over and over again, trying to find these things and try to tell myself that I'm safe, that I didn't do any of these things. But it would happen so frequently and so fast that I would actually forget what reality was. And so I'd disassociate. I would forget the night before, and I would not be sure about what was true and what was my brain making up the events. And so I lived with this, and this was happening more and more frequently. And it got to a point where I agreed with my now wife, and I said, look, maybe you're right. I've been drinking too much. And I was focusing on the drinking. But it was the first time I went and saw a doctor. And so I was 28, and I went into the GP's office, and it was one of the hardest things to say for me. I said, I think I've got a mental health issue. And I choked on those words as they came out. And the doctor said, okay, well, let's do some tests. And she did some questionnaires that we went through. And she said, well, you certainly got some psychological distress going on. I'm going to refer you to a psychologist. Now, I didn't even know what a psychologist did, to be honest with you. And these are the first times I'm really hearing these words, mental health, and from a professional. This is 2012 we're talking about. So even mental health discussions back then weren't a huge thing. And so going to the psychologist, did some more questionnaires and tests and so forth. And she said, Simon, yeah, you've got depression. I'm like, oh, okay, maybe that's true. Yeah, I can see some of that. You've got this thing called anxiety. I'm like, okay, I know a little bit about anxiety, but I have heard of it. Oh, you've also got this thing called OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. I'm like, I have no idea what that is. Tell me about that. And so this is my entry into understanding what had been going on since I was 8 years old. And I put a bit of a timeline through my life and go, yeah, I did that humming thing, and then I did the checking thing, and I did this other thing around my car, so making sure that the handbrake was fully up because I worried that it would roll down and kill people if it was on a hill or something like that. I did these other things around checking that I've got my wallet and phone because I worried, and my keys, because I worried about if I lost them, someone might steal my identity, or they've got access to my keys, so then they can break into my house because they've also got my address, which is on my driver's license. All these things were rambling and rambling and rambling. I'm like, oh, I can start to make sense of the world. But what they did, the psychologist did, was we focused on the depression, we focused on the drinking. I got medication for depression, essentially. We never targeted the OCD. And so I kept going on the way that I was going. Now that I had these labels, and I guess part of me also expected them to heal me, for them to say, you've got these things, here's some medication, stop drinking for a little bit, you'll be healed. And I kind of bought into that. I expected them to wave a magic wand. I didn't want to do any homework that the therapist gave me. I just wanted them to fix me like I was going to fix my car. Give it to the mechanic, they can fix it, then I'm all right again. And so for the next, say, 10 years, in and out of therapy, psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, social workers, coaches, you name it, I've tried it. Breath work, meditation, men's retreats, and not a lot stuck. It was a lot of me going in and expecting, like a lot of guys, to be healed by walking through the door and then walking out and everything's all good again. But it wasn't until, say, 2020, and I'm pretty sure everyone remembers what happened in 2020. We had COVID and these things called lockdowns. This was like the tipping point for me. So it got to a point where I'd been working from home. In fact, we just had our daughter. So my wife had this idea of having a whole year off, and she was going to do all these amazing things with her daughter, like the mummy-daughter stuff. Took the time off of work, and then COVID happened and completely ruined that for her. And so we were all stuck at home. School wasn't going on and all sorts of stuff. And so had my mental health struggles, had a job which was high pressure. So I was working, never felt a relief from work. I was also studying my social work degree, master's degree, part-time, and it just all got too much. And my life basically came crumbling down in a phone call with my boss, who was saying, Simon, your work's taking longer for you to complete. What's going on? And I've been trying to negate that for a while. I've been saying, oh, there's lots of delays. This is what's going on. What I wasn't tuning into was how I was feeling. It was being in meetings, for example, where I'm the chair of a meeting, being 10 minutes into a conversation and having no idea who's in the room or what I've even been talking about for 10 minutes or what anybody else had been talking about for 10 minutes. It was also a lot of procrastination and a lot of brain fog, not understanding what's going on or wanting more for myself, but feeling like I'm stuck in a rut. Every day was Groundhog Day. I was just in a lot of pain, mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, you name it. I was becoming a potato, essentially. Like I had no feelings or anything. I was just like, there's someone existing in the world. I'd gone from surviving to existing and definitely not thriving. And so in that phone call with my boss, I started crying and I said, I think I'm burnt out. She goes, well, okay, I didn't realize it was so bad. I'm like, well, it is. And I've been bottling it up for a long time. And it was that moment where I got help for burnout, and I started to tune into the therapist now. I actually started to go really listen to him and go, okay, well, this is what you're saying. If this is what I've got to do to get through burnout, because I've never had burnout before, then I'm going to do that thing. And that included doing homework. So doing things like journaling, so writing down stuff, getting it out of my head, trying meditation with more purpose, like actually tuning into the meditations and not just trying to fall asleep. Um, it's actually about doing my self-care, so cutting back on drinking, and I tried that for a little while. It's doing more frequent exercise, as much as we could do within COVID lockdown. So we were fortunate that we could walk around our local neighborhood, and that's pretty much it. So really trying to tune into that type of stuff. But there's also came a point where I felt like the need to start sharing my story, and this was a real pivotal moment because I'd been wearing that mask since I was 8 years old, that everything's okay, that I was the jock at school, that I was successful. And I was, like, I had, a university degree, a loving family. We bought a house. Like, I wasn't in that lower socioeconomic space anymore. I was in middle income Australia. I had a lot of privilege. I'm white, 40-year-old guy, like I've got a lot of privilege in the world, and I had made it to that level. I'd brought myself out from the lows to that middle range. But I was deeply unhappy. I was deeply miserable. I was lonely. I was upset. I was depressed. I was in a world of pain, and I wanted to get out of that. And so taking off the mask and saying, here I am. This is Simon. This is this guy who's living underneath this mask. I felt this need to start sharing. And so I created Mindful Men as an Instagram page just to start sharing my story. So, hey, I'm Simon. I'm a man. Oh, here's a little bit about burnout. Actually, let's talk about depression. Let's talk about OCD. Let's talk about being a dad and all these things. And people started to buy into that. But it's really interesting what the power of social media sometimes. And, sometimes we're talking off air about Google listening to us and stuff like that. All of a sudden, I had all these people that had OCD fall into my feed. And I'm like, oh, there's somebody else out there with obsessive compulsive disorder. What's going on here? And more. So I started following them. And they started talking about this thing called exposure response preventions, or ERP, which is the gold standard treatment for OCD. So when we think about depression, for example, we think about cognitive behavioral therapy. And the idea is about changing our thought patterns so that results in changing our behavioral patterns. With ERP, it's kind of the reverse of that. What we want to do is accept the thoughts that come in. So the obsessive thought maybe of me losing my voice if I stop using my voice. But we want to actually change the behavior, because in OCD, it's the behavior that, excuse me, that reinforces the obsessive thought. And so we want to change that. And so I'm like, okay, I've never heard of this ERP thing before. So I found a local therapist and I booked myself in, and I actually wanted to do the homework. I said, I want to target this thing. I've been through all these therapists before for over 10 years. Nobody's talked about OCD except for the diagnosis. Let's target it. So we started working on that. So remember before I said like going around the house is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we actually started changing that behavior around what I'm checking and when I'm checking it. So it might be mixing up that group. So it might be 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, doing things in reverse, telling my brain that I'm in control. Or if I'm feeling really good, it might be actually skipping one of those numbers, which is huge in the OCD space because everything has to be done in a pattern. So for me to go 1, 2, 4, 5, like, geez, I've just missed out number 3. What's going to happen? Oh, the more I sit with that, nothing's going to happen because actually all the anxiety is in my head. This is an anxiety condition and it's just in my head. Nobody broke through the window. Nobody came in and stole anything or killed us. Nobody murdered us. Nothing happened. And I dare say if I had that frame of mind since 8 years old, a lot of that stuff would never have happened. It's just what was made up in my mind. All these external things that I thought was going to happen because of where I grew up and when I grew up, I thought that was going to come true. And that's an OCD brain. It's an anxious brain. It thinks that the worst case scenario is going to happen. So once I started doing this and I took the mask off and I started engaging in the homework that my therapist did, I started to feel like I'm no longer surviving. I'm no longer existing. I'm now starting to thrive. I'm actually starting to not feel so depressed, or I'm not so anxious. I can get a control on this OCD beast. And so over the last few years, I've been tuning into mindfulness as a way to do that. And I think mindfulness is, for me, is more than meditation. It's about turning off autopilot and turning on conscious living. So it's for guys to go, How am I showing up every day? Am I just getting up, going to work, coming home, repeat, repeat, repeat? Am I just doing that and existing? For me, I was sick of existing. I actually wanted to be present in my life. I've got two kids. I want to hear
Mhm.
what they're saying. I want to laugh with them. I want to play games. I don't want to dismiss them because I'm too busy scrolling through social media or doing my business and stuff like that. I want to live in the moment. And so mindfulness for me is about tuning into all of that, recognizing when I'm in pain and recognizing what I need to do to heal. And so that became my mantra, is about thriving. And the last thing that I did to thrive was to get sober at 40. Is to over the years, my kids, and I thank my daughter actually. She was saying, it's Daddy, it's the weekend. Are you having a beer? And or Daddy, you've had a big day at work. Are you having a beer? And for a lot of people, and me growing up, that was the ultimate. Your kids would go to get a beer out of the fridge and bring it to you. That's what I was, grew up on and seeing. But I hated when my daughter would say anything to do with me and beer in one sentence. It just didn't sit right with me. It felt weird. It felt unnatural. I didn't want that for my daughter, and my son would join in as well. We'd go out to I don't know, a restaurant or a pub or an event, and I would always be the designated drinker, so not the designated driver. I would always go drinking because it felt more normal. It enabled me to calm my brain and connect with other people. But every time I did that, and I sit in the passenger seat, my daughter and my son would say, "Daddy, why aren't you driving? You always drive." So then me and my wife would have the conversation of, you can't drink and drive. And so Daddy's had a few drinks. And I felt so low having these conversations with my kids in the car. And then my 40th happened, and I thought, it's my 40th birthday. I'm going to get maybe some nice gifts from the people that come. They've got some family coming around. It's going to be a really nice night. Yeah, we'll have some drinks and some fun. All the gifts that I got were different types of beer. And I'm like, and I felt so empty in that moment. And I remember I'd had a few drinks and it got to the end of the night, and I burst out crying with my wife, and I said, "What is going on? Like, why did I get all these things of beer?" She said, "Simon, that's because that's what people know you for. They know you like to drinks, become your identity." And at that
Mhm.
moment, I'm like, "Know what? I haven't been listening to anybody. I've been ignoring all this for a long time. I've been using alcohol to heal myself, to numb everything, to feel normal. It's enough's enough. I've got to get back onto that thriving bandwagon and actually do something about this." So the next day, one day after 40th, we took all the beer out the fridge, we gave it away, we tipped it down the sink, whatever we couldn't get rid of, and I've just been on a sober journey since. And so I've just detailed 40 years of my journey, from starting as an 8-year-old, growing up in Adelaide, South Australia, to all these influences. But I feel when you do the timeline, and this is for any guy that's listening, you do your timeline on your life, you can kind of see pivotal moments that kind of made you into the man that you are today. And that for me was mental health challenges, from OCD, depression was in there, suicidal ideation was in there, anxiety was in there, different relationships. Looking back at my relationships and going, what happened there? Like, what, I was in a loving, good relationship. Why did that break down? And why did the next one break down? What's different about my relationship with my now wife? And then becoming a dad, like, what's different about these things? Where do I want to go in life? And when you do that timeline, you can go, okay, starts to make sense now. When I was born, for a lot of guys, we were socially conditioned to be strong and not say anything, to put that mask on and not show the world any sign of weakness. But it's 2024 now. We're allowed to take that mask off and show our vulnerability. And this is the work I do now. So I didn't go into it, but along that journey, I wanted to work with guys just like me. I didn't know what that was initially. It took me about 20 years to find out that a social worker could be a mental health provider, and I found social work as a mid 30-year-old. So I went and did that course because I wanted to work in mental health, and I wanted to work with men, particularly because of my own story, knowing how hard it was to live in silence for 20 years, but then also to go through therapy and connect with therapists who didn't connect with me and didn't feel like it was getting anywhere. So I can use that learned experience of social work and this lived experience of mental health challenges, alcohol misuse, burnout, fatherhood, careers, to sit down with guys and get real really quickly, have that real strong bond, because we have a shared history. We have shared stories. They're not the same stories because everyone's story is unique to their own. But I can say to them with heart on my hand on my heart is that yeah, I've lived with depression, or I've drank for years to numb everything. I know how hard that is. I know how hard it is to be a parent and to go through different things. I know how hard it is to not share your true authentic self, and that helps them to open up and go, okay, oh yep, Simon gets me, so let's get into it a lot quicker. And yeah, so it's a beautiful thing to watch their healing journey as well, and that keeps me on track for my journey, which is still a journey. It's never finished. I just get better and better every year at thriving instead of surviving or even just existing as well.
All right, all right. That definitely was a mouthful.
Yes.
But I
Sorry
love
about
it.
that.
And no, I'm happy that you did, because like you said, when we begin to reflect back, excuse me, when we begin to reflect back on pivotal moments in our life, especially in our younger days, we were able to find out, oh, this is why I do that. Because some of those things follow us into adulthood, and we forget even why we do it. It's like, all
Mm.
right, why do I do this? Why do I, and those things follow us. And if we take the time to think back, like, okay, let me think about my life. Let me think about these things, these memories that I have of certain things, and why is that I remember this, but then I forgot something else, and usually from the things that we remember, there's traces of it in our adulthood, as grown men. So I'm glad that you shared your story, because again, also it gives us the time, it gives us the opportunity to be vulnerable. And I know that when we're vulnerable, it opens up the doors for other men, and so I love having the conversations with men on here, because we get to share. And I think that's very important for everybody, that to share your story, because as you share it, it begins to help you to think about it and kind of work through things in your mind, because now you're speaking it, and so your mind is kind of like running through the reel of it. And then it allows you to speak in a way that other people can relate to, because sometimes there are people that's going through the same thing that you went through, and they're like, oh well, yeah, I deal with that too. And so I love having these conversations for men and with men, because it gives us the opportunity to open up, and in this day and time, we really need that. Everybody needs it, but especially men. Especially you mentioned about the COVID and the pandemic, because even here in America, one of the things, and I'll talk about this a little later, but one of the things that I've been blessed to be a part of is an organization called the Forgiveness Mission, where we do virtual workshops. But that started because the young lady who started it, in her job where she works at, they deal with a lot of things, and so they were having a meeting talking about the rise in suicides, and here, especially since once I got involved with it, and I realized that even amongst African American men, it shot up, the suicides in men across the board, but then in African American men, it shot up too. And it's like, we got to have these conversations. We got to be able to open up. We got to be able to share, and I often talk about my own experience, talking about my suicidal ideation since I started the podcast. I've been open about it. And one of my sisters called me, after hearing one of the episodes, and said, how was it that you were going through all of that to the point that you thought about taking your own life and we not know about it, And it was like, because we're not having the conversations. We're not talking about it. We're not checking up on each other. We're not asking how you're doing, and then following up with the how you're really doing, because we, as men, we're always going to give you that first reply, like, oh, I'm good. Everything's good. The sun is shining, but like, yeah, but how are you really doing? What's really going on with you? And when we start asking those questions, it opens up the door for us to share. It opens up the door for us to be able to relate to one another in ways that we usually wouldn't, And so that's why I'm glad that you just told your story. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, because as a therapist, I'm sure you've come across this more and more now, and dealing with men. But why is it that you think that men are so reluctant to share? Why is it that we kind of have this thing where it's like, I want to say something, but then it's something that holds us back, and it's like, no, I'm just gonna kind of keep it to myself.
Yeah, there's so many, and a lot of it comes from shame and stigma of talking about stuff. And the reason I talk about growing up in the 80s and 90s and in the northern suburbs of Adelaide is on purpose as well. It's not just to say where I'm from and when I grew up. It's actually to describe what we actually call social constructs of masculinity. So where we grew up, when we grew up, really does matter. And whenever you go to see a therapist, they usually say, "Oh, tell me about your childhood," because they want to understand how you developed, who were the
Mhm.
important relationships you had. So if you think about the first 6 to 7 years, these are the developmental years we have as children. We learn relationships, we learn speech, we learn comprehension, we learn what the visual world's telling us. We start to learn emotions as well. And then how that's influenced is also who are the parent figures, who are the people bringing us up, who are the people who are teaching us about the world or not teaching us about the world. And so you think about, you're a dad of a daughter. When she first came out of mum, what color t-shirt did she put on, or what color clothes did she put on? Do you remember?
I'm sure it was pink.
Pink. That's right. And so for boys, it's generally blue.
Mhm.
We from day one, excuse me, from day one, we socially condition our children to be a certain way. So pink is very pink, or actually for girls, any color is really acceptable. I mean, you probably wouldn't see black on a newborn baby, but you never
Yeah.
know. Like every other color is acceptable. You were to put that pink top on a boy, it's a very different conversation. Oh,
Hmm.
what's wrong? What's going on? What's wrong with him? It's like, well, nothing really. He might just like pink. We might just like pink as parents.
Yeah.
I remember when we had our kids, and we were trying to find neutral colors because we actually wanted our kids to kind of grow into their own identities. But all we could find was blue for boys, pink for girls, princesses for girls, unicorns for girls. It might be a
Mhm.
superhero for a boy or a Mack truck or whatever it is.
Yeah.
We're socially conditioned to be a certain way, and anything that's opposite of that becomes a bit of a taboo. And so mental health discussions weren't something that I grew up with. It wasn't something that was the norm. I dare say it's becoming the norm these days, and everyone is very mindful. Even in the media, you see things like on adverts for cigarettes or alcohol, there's usually an addiction type of thing at the end of those adverts. Or if there's a mental health story on the news or whatever, they usually finish with a hotline that you can call if you're in mental distress as well. We do it in podcasting as well. Usually have a disclaimer on triggering episodes as well, or in
Mhm.
the show notes we put something in there. These things didn't exist when we grew up, and so we learnt that it was that we're not meant to talk about this thing. This is a taboo topic. And, I said about being reinforced in the schoolyard. All my mates were saying the same thing. Teachers would say the same thing. My sports coaches would say the same thing. It would be like, suck it up, move on. You're a boy, you're a man, harden up, drink some concrete, harden up. And so that's why a lot of the time guys struggle with this, because for a long time, that's what was the norm. But also we have an element of trying to fix things as well. We want to be able to fix things, but in the mental health space, it's very difficult when it's such a taboo topic. It's something that we're not naturally able to do. Women, on the other hand, girls and women, females, they are very good at sharing and talking because they've been conditioned to share. We
Mhm.
we we go up to them, hey little girl, like our daughters, Pippa, what's going on, Pip? You all right? Well, tell me about that. Our son might fall over, going, oh, brush it off, keep going, you're all right, get on
Mhm.
back on your
Yeah.
bike. We do that
Yeah.
subconsciously. We don't do it on purpose to put them in this box. As modern day parents, we're actually reverting back to what the way we were parented as well. And it's not to say that our parents are at fault, or all their parents. It's just what happened after generation. Because you think about history, the last 100 years, world wars, famine, the Great Depression, all these big things that happened, global financial crisis in the early 2007, I want to say. These
Mhm.
periods of time, we've got war going on right now, these periods of time where we had to be strong. We didn't have any other options. It's either survive or die, really, in the big, broad things. And so a lot of that's influenced about how we engage with our mental health. The good thing about COVID is, and we brought that up, is I think for the first time in my life, it's the first time that employers, schools, media, everybody, community was all around going deeper on how we're actually going. Like, and when we're working from home, my boss would make an effort to call everybody regularly, or the team leaders would call everybody regularly how we're going. We'd have team meetings where we would end on something that's really positive, show us your pets on Zoom or whatever it was, to bring up the thing. And it started conversations around mental health in a way that was no longer shameful or stigmatizing. And so men could start to participate in these phone calls or these Zoom chats or broader conversations, and go, you know what? Maybe I can start sharing. And I think that's what happened for me. It was that moment in time where I felt like I could take off that mask and go, here I am, world. Like, this is me. I'm emotional. I get upset. I live with these mental health conditions. I'm not a girl. I'm not gay. I'm just me. Like, I don't need to worry about these labels that other people are going to put on me. And I think a lot of it has been shame. A lot of it's been how we were brought up, because that's the way society brought us up. It's not because our parents did anything wrong, or grandparents. Sometimes it is, but often it's just they were just doing the best with what they knew as well. The modern world has the internet, and we have the internet. We have encyclopedias on our phone. Basically, whatever we need, Google, it would tell us.
Right.
We're starting to get AI that's telling us what we need before we even know we need it. Back in the day, I remember having a really old set of encyclopedias
Yep.
in our lounge room, and that's the only knowledge that we had, like 20 books. I dare say mental health wasn't in one of those books. We might have had something around physical health and stuff like that, but that also shows that over time, more research, more science goes into this space, and we learn more about it. So, for example, I'm going to get some therapeutic on you. So the Diagnostic Statistics Manual of Psychiatric Disorders, so the DSM, which is where all of our mental health conditions are, essentially, that's the criteria. That's how we find out if you meet OCD, for example, is through that DSM book. That evolves over every couple of years. And so OCD used to be just labeled as an anxiety condition. Now, with more evidence and more research, OCD becomes its own chapter in the book. And so other conditions, autism, for example, we're seeing a growth in autism diagnoses. We know that autism is on a spectrum as well. So you generally have level 1, 2, and 3 at the moment based on the DSM criteria. ADHD is becoming really, well diagnosed at the moment. A lot of adults, people your age and my age, are getting late diagnoses, because what's happening is they're taking their children to get diagnosed and recognizing in that assessment process, hang on a second, I've been doing that for 20, 30, 40
Yeah.
years. And then they subsequently get a diagnosis as well. Now, diagnosis can be helpful. It helped me. It gave me an answer to what was going on. I think for men, having an answer or an idea of what's going on is really helpful, because we want to fix it, right? Not
Right.
knowing is the challenge, but also labels can be debilitating. They can get us down. So it's what we do with those labels. It's how we use that knowledge to then thrive. And for me, as I said before, I was just surviving. I was existing. I wasn't using the label to my full extent. I wasn't actually treating the label and working through it. I was just existing with the label. Now it's about thriving, really understanding OCD. So as a therapist myself, I love it when someone with OCD comes into the clinic or into my space, because I can go, I get it from a lived experience, and maybe give them some insight into the different types of OCD. Because for me, OCD comes in different themes. Or it's not for me, for everybody, there's different OCD themes. So for example, mine is harm OCD. So it's the absence of my behavior could cause harm to somebody else. And so that's why I do it. This is how I conceptualize it. Other people, it's around contamination. So that's the people that wash their hands religiously. They can't stop washing because they fear germs, and either them germs hurting them and killing them or whatever, or them passing on germs to somebody else. And that's one of the more well-known ones, people washing their hands. There's other ones around symmetry. This is the other well-known part of OCD, is people that have a neat, tidy desk, or they're a neat and tidy household, or things just have to be perfect. So there's around symmetry and having to get things perfect. And if it doesn't exist perfectly, that creates a lot of anxiety and emotional distress as well. So as we go on with the generations, more and more of this knowledge comes to fruition. We start to understand things more. We get new diagnoses, new mental health conditions. I think alcoholism has changed, has evolved from alcoholism or alcoholics to substance misuse disorder or substance abuse disorder or whatever it's framed at these days, because also the way that we name things has a stigmatizing effect as well. So for me, alcohol was kind of like one of my last taboo topics that I would talk about. I wouldn't really talk about it until I got sober, and I wanted to share that with the world because I never saw myself as an alcoholic. I saw myself as someone who struggled with alcohol. And so, because I didn't associate with the label of alcoholic, I couldn't talk about it if it was very shameful, very stigmatizing. But with time, that label has changed to a new label, one that's more accepting or acceptable. It's the same with our language. And you talk about race and religion and all these different concepts. What was okay to say 20 years ago is not okay to say now, And
Mhm.
so with time, things change. Our society changes. Our understanding of the world and the mind and the body changes as well. And I think with time, more and more guys can feel comfortable with talking about this type of stuff. But if we just start now at 2024, just go through that timeline of your life. Go, okay, where were the pain points? How am I existing the way I exist? And if you want to do something about it, it's about tuning into things like this podcast. It's about talking to someone who kind of gets mental health and is not going to put you down, because there's still a lot of those people around in the world. And if you don't have one of those types of people, a doctor is really good because they're unbiased. You just go to your GP and say, let's have a chat about mental health. And if anything that anyone's gathered from this particular hour together is that you and me, Ernest, we're on different sides of the planet. We've only just met today and we've just spent an hour talking about mental health and men's mental health. It is that easy. It's just two guys talking a lot of the time. And that's what I do in my therapy clinic. It's not me as the therapist, you as the client. I actually take therapy out of the clinic. We go for a walk, we get a coffee, we go for a drive. Some my younger clients, they like to play video games or go get Macca's drive-through or whatever it is. We just do it in a more normal way and more everyday living way. And that's what guys, I think, relate to. So it's about finding a clinician, a therapist who is interested in men's mental health, can talk about it. Maybe as a lived experience therapist, that's even better as well, because they've walked in those same shoes. So yeah, a lot of it comes to that shame, stigma, but a lot of it also is because it's just how we've been socially constructed over the years. And I think as dads and for any new parents coming through, or even just guys who aren't parents, is we can change that. We can move from surviving to thriving and start teaching each other, calling each other out, saying, how are you really going? Tell me that. Let's get past the BS and let's get to the real serious stuff. Or we can display that for our kids and support our kids to grow up into well-rounded, emotionally intelligent kids that recognize that it's okay to be not okay.
Good, 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 good. I have one more question before we get out of here. But I did want to say I'm from that same time period, right? So I was born in '74, so I'm an '80s, '90s kid too. And as you're even describing your upbringing and how you grew up, I'm like, yeah, I recognize that right away because I'm like, it's sort of the same thing. We in our earlier, for me, right, of my time in our family, in our earlier years, it was pretty good. We probably was like middle class to upper middle class, maybe for a while when I came along, and then I'm the fourth child, right? So it was really nice for a little while. But then, for whatever reason, some things happened. My dad ended up losing his job, and it just like a domino effect, and just like everything just pretty much fell apart. And we went from living the American dream, with the house and the car and the picket fence. We had all of that to my dad, my mom, and 9 kids sleeping in one bedroom in my grandmother's house. You know what I
Mm.
mean? And so it was just like within a matter of maybe 2 years, like a year and a half to 2 years, we lost everything, and had to rebuild over time to get that back. And so I definitely had when you're telling your story, I'm like, yeah, I can see that because that was my life,
Mm.
growing up. And again, but being able to share in a way, we're on a different types whole different side of the planet, right? But yet with our stories we can connect,
Mm.
as girl dads, as being in the same growing up in the same environments, even though in different areas of the world, and being able to connect and see how we're really not that different in some of the things that we experience and the ways that we handle ourselves. So I'm gonna ask you this last question, so we'll get out of here, because one of the things that I when I had you fill out your form and you were filling out, one of the things that you talked about was using our pain as purpose, right? And that struck me because in my journey, the last 3 years, I've been going through a whole journey, and God gave me a quote, and it says that pain births purpose, purpose births progress, and progress is the evidence that God is at work. Right. And so this was a saying that he gave me in the midst of some things that I was going through that really is what birthed, even this podcast, came out of that pain of the things that I was dealing with at that time. And so I resonated when you said that, using that pain for purpose. I'm like, that's this whole podcast came from that. You know what I mean? And so talk to us a little bit about, from your viewpoint, and even as evidence, not evidence, but talking to other men that may be listening to this, like how do you do it? And then how can even they use their pain of whatever those things is that they're dealing with to finding a purpose in it in order to be able to help someone else?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a great question because it again makes me reflect back on the timeline, and at the time when things started to switch was I had finished high school, and like most high schoolers, everyone's like, "Oh, what do you want to do when you grow up?" And I didn't really know, but I had this idea: I want to work with people like me. I could even verbalize. I didn't know what that meant.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happened is I went to university. I was one of the lucky few from my area to actually go to university. Most people didn't go to uni. Yeah. And I started a psychology degree, but I didn't know what a psychologist did. And I ultimately dropped out. Like, it was just too hard for me. But I switched my majors into anthropology, so the study of culture. And I thought, oh, yeah, that's okay. But again, before Google, I think this was before Google, I typed into AOL or Yahoo or something like that.
Yeah.
And this is in dial-up internet days. Like, what does a social
Right. Yeah.
scientist do with an anthropology major? The only thing that came up was the public service. So I ended up somehow getting a job in the public service, moving out of home, starting this 15-year career, doing all these interesting jobs, but no jobs that really lit me up. And then I kind of fell into this autopilot mode where I'd go to work, I'd do my day's thing, go home, repeat. And then when kids came along, there was a bit of extra juice to that, but it was still repeat. It was Groundhog Day. I was never fulfilled. I never would bounce out of bed. So at the moment, I'm a podcaster too. So I'd bounce out of bed at 5 o'clock in the morning and do podcasts. At 5 o'clock in the morning, I'd kick my wife out of the bedroom. Sorry, wife. And I'd get onto here and talk about men's mental health. I would never do that as a public service. And so I was always unfulfilled, and I always felt empty. I felt like I was never living my life's purpose. And in the back of me, I'm like, hang on a second. What about this dream that you had growing up about helping guys just like you? And by now I knew what a mental health was, and I'd been diagnosed. And so I went to my local university here on the Sunshine Coast, which is a different part of Australia to where I grew up. And I inquired with a jobs counsellor or careers counsellor, and they said, oh, try social work. And so I looked into it. I'm like, yeah, I can do this. This is creative. It can get me into mental health and working with guys just like me. And as I was doing that course, my brain started to wake up again. It started to feel like I wasn't on autopilot. I'm like, oh, I was learning about OCD and different therapy tools and different ideas around the world. This is where I learned about social constructions of masculinity, was through social work, study. And I felt alive again. I'm like, I haven't felt this good for years. Like, I've been having all these awesome, interesting jobs, and some of them were awesome, really sexy jobs as well. Like I worked in sports anti-doping, I worked in border protection, I worked in refugee immigration detention centers, you name it, but it just didn't light me up. It wasn't my true purpose. And so going through that social work degree, I'm like, well, I want to work in mental health. I've got this experience in mental health, and I've got all this lived experience. I understand what it feels like to feel down and out and not be able to share. And I know so many other guys are probably out there who need someone to help, hold their hand and take them along this journey with them. And so I saw it as a moment in time where I could turn that pain into my purpose and really use it. And I know so many people, they don't want to dwell on the pain. They want to move past it. They want to forget it. And that's perfectly okay. But we can actually use it, our experiences, our life experiences. And that doesn't have to be in mental health. It could be on housing, situation like your story. It could be, supporting families to come out of that one bedroom and into a
Mhm.
house for their own, or getting back on their feet with work, or whatever it is. Doesn't have to be around mental health. It could just be something that you've experienced. And you go, you know what? I know about this stuff because I've lived it.
Yeah.
And if you can add a bit of learned stuff on there with a bit of maybe some extra study, whether it's a university or college degree, whether it's just going to your local community college, or we call it TAFE here in Australia, and doing something, or doing an online course or something like that, where you can put a bit of theory behind it, that turns into a superpower, and then you can use that to leverage it off to the world. And I've got a podcast, and I come on podcasts, and I've got a therapy business, and in all the marketing that I do, I can say, hey, we're having real authentic conversations that are informed by my lived experience, by my learned experience. I don't need to hide away from it anymore. And I know a lot of therapists in this space, they balk at this notion of using your lived experience, because we're taught in university and college, don't bring yourself into the client situation. It's all about the client, which is perfectly 100% okay and true. But, and this is the but, and particularly working for men,
Mhm.
men like a bit of lived experience. They like it when you come in and
Yeah.
go, you know what, I understand it. And so I took that as fuel, and this is the fuel for my purpose. And the more I do it, the more I put myself out there into this space, the more I start remembering my own history as well. So a quick example was this morning, on my own podcast, I had a guest on talking about grief and trauma associated with miscarriages and the loss of
Mm.
a child in the first 20 weeks of pregnancy, which reminded me of me and my wife losing a child to miscarriage before our son was born. I've never talked about that until this morning. And that was almost 10 years ago. It was 8 years ago now. I thought I was holding on to this secret to support and protect my wife. And in fact, I talked to her last night about it. She goes, no, I've been telling people for the last couple of years. And I'm like, really? You could have told me before that, because I could have shared it, but I felt like I was
Right.
protecting her. So I never talked about it. But I can talk about it because I can see the purpose behind it. I can see that, yeah, I've had all these pain points, but I can use this to support one other bloke out there. Even if it's just you, Ernest, if you go away from this
Mhm.
conversation and go, you know what? Simon said something that made me think. That is an amazing thing in itself. And we talked about men's suicide. In Australia, it's around 75% of daily suicides are men or male.
Mm.
And so if we could just bring one guy back from the edge and go, you know what,
Yeah.
there's guys out there talking about this type of stuff. It's really cool. I can do it too. Look at them. They're thriving. They've got purpose and power and passion. Maybe I can use my pain for the same. And that's what I hope to do just by sharing that story. And that's what I do. And so that's where it's come from, is that the desire to help other guys just like me, but also recognizing that the label can actually be not a death sentence or a life sentence. It could actually be opening a door to a new world of possibilities. And I've since, left that old public service career, which wasn't lighting me up, to running my own business. Never run a
Mm.
business before, which is really scary. And having a family, and now my wife's about to come into the business as well, and support me. And now we've got a family business, and we're going to show the kids. I've got my Mindful Men t-shirts. We've got Mindful Men all over the car, and they get in there. They're always talking about Mindful Men, which is great because we're showing the next generation that it's good to be mindful. In fact, my son got a bit upset with me this morning. He said, why is it just men, Dad? Like, why can't you talk to women as well? I'm like, I do. I just know how much men need this stuff, and they
Mm.
need something that is tailored to them and not just generic like everybody else gets, because women get their own dedicated mental health support services, children do, the elderly do, but men are kind of left behind. And I want to kind of fill that gap with conversations just like this.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I definitely agree with you, even with because I, as a speaker, I'm a speaker also, right? And so as a speaker, one of the things that I talk about is when I talk about finding your purpose, I always say your purpose leaves clues, and
Mm.
so some of the things that happen to you, you realize when you start doing that reflective work and thinking about your life, that you had these little experiences all along the way, and there's a theme that kind of goes through it, right? And it's like, oh, that's why I feel so strongly about this, because I've had these experiences, and like you said, you even mentioned about, me possibly coming out of my situation with us living in that one bedroom to, how that I can help someone do that. And I actually did. That actually happened,
Hmm.
because once we got back on our feet, my mom and dad, and bought a house, and we kind of rebuild. One of the things my mom would always do, we would always take people in, because we end up bouncing around a little bit, maybe to like at least like three different houses, during that time period. Because we started off with my grandmother, then we moved with my aunt, then we moved with another friend, so we bounced around to a couple houses. And so when we did get situated and got back on our feet, my mom would take people in, that we going through different challenges or whatever. She would, come stay with us, and not knowing, how that was playing a part on me. But even in my own life, growing up, I get married. I married my wife. Has four sons, right? So they're my stepsons, but they have friends. We parted for like the whole entire time that my kids were even up through high school. We never had 1 year where we didn't have somebody staying with us, right? Whether it was one of their friends or a family friend or a family member, we always took someone in, And so I'm sure that played a part in my own experiences, and now it's just kind of playing out that way. Like, all right, this is what happened to you. Now you do it for someone else, and you find that purpose in the things that you live through. Then now you use those same things to help someone else, and I love it. I'm gonna let you go because we've been on here a long time, and it's probably later where you're at than where I am. So I definitely appreciate you being on. I definitely appreciate having this conversation, and can't wait to get you on the Girl Dad Discussions podcast, because that'll be a whole nother conversation.
Yes.
But I want you to have the last word. So I want you to have the last word, and I want you to tell us your social media handles and things like that, and where the audience can find you to work with you or to just follow you, if that's the
Yeah.
case. So I'll give you a couple seconds to think about that. To my listeners, first of all, I want to say thank you guys for tuning in to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. Make sure that you guys are checking us out on our websites. So we have our main website, which is the dealhealfulfill.org website. And that website is just an overall general website that talks about everything that we have going on, the workshops, the merchandise, the I said workshops already, speaking, podcasts, everything that we have going on. We have a lot of information there. So you can check us out at dealhealfulfill.org to find out just all the things that we have going on. And also, you'll be able to go there and book me to come and speak at your school or church or event or whatever, or even host a workshop for you at that dealhealfulfill.org. Or you could just email info@dealhealfulfill.org, and we can do it that way. Also, make sure you guys are checking out our inspirational t-shirt line, which includes our new t-shirts for our podcast. Our podcast merch t-shirts is also there at heal2healtees.com, deal2healtees.com. Put some inspiration in your situation. Wear an inspirational tee and be inspired all day. That is our tagline. So make sure you guys go there and check us out with our inspirational t-shirts. And last but not least, ebooks by ejames.com. That's ebooks by ejames.com, where you can find the ebooks that we have available. I've written several ebooks, and they can all be found there. One that I'm very proud of, which we talked about, the Girl Dad Discussions podcast, which is the core four values that every daughter should get from her father. So you can find that ebook as well as others at ebooksbyejames.com. Make sure you guys go there to check us out. Also, I mentioned earlier, I've been blessed to be a part of an organization called the Forgiveness Mission. And what we do, we have free virtual workshops every quarter of the year talking about forgiveness, what it is, what it's not, what it means to forgive yourself, forgive others. So we talk about everything around forgiveness. Again, it is a free virtual workshop, so you can take it on your phone, on your laptop, and it's every quarter of the year. Actually, now we're actually doing it every other month. So we went from every quarter to doing it every other month. So every other month, we have these free virtual workshops. You can go to forgivenessmission.com to register for the next one, or go to Eventbrite and look up Forgiveness Workshop held by forgivenessmission.com, and you can sign up that way. So whenever you're listening to this podcast, either one just ended or one is coming up. So whenever you go to look at forgivenessmission.com, you'll be able to register for our next workshop. Last but not least, I told you guys I would tell you how you could win $100 from the podcast. You can win $100 from the podcast by joining our super subscriber contest. What must you do? You must first subscribe to our YouTube channel, to our Facebook page, and to our podcast on Spotify. And after you've done those three things, then text the word WIN, WIN, to the number 866 326 0730 to qualify to win $100. The contest is random and it's ongoing. So once you're in, you can always win. Just text the word WIN, WIN, to the number 866 326 0730 to qualify to win $100. And when you text the word WIN, make sure you leave your contact information so that we can contact you if you are our next $100 winner. Simon, once again, let me say thank you for being on. I really appreciate this conversation. I really appreciate us having it. And I want you to have the last word. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, Ernest, thanks so much for having me. I really loved getting to know you and hear some of your story through this conversation as well. It's always good to have a two-way conversation on podcasts, so it's good to hear some of your lived experience as well. So thanks for having me on. I'd like to leave all the guys out there and girls listening that I love this Tony Robbins quote, and everyone who knows Tony Robbins he's got a few pearls of wisdom, but it's change happens when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change. So we all know that doing things differently is hard. Like having a conversation around mental health is going to be difficult at first. The more you do it, the more easier it becomes, and then that allows us to break out of this prison, this mental prison that we often have when we live with a mental health condition. It enables us to break open that lid, step out of it, and start thriving again instead of just surviving or just existing as well. So I just want you to take away that note, and for guys specifically, just recognizing that it's not weak to speak. It's actually full of courage. It's full of strength. It's full of vulnerability. Yes, I know guys balk at that word, but it is possible and it is good for you. It is a healthy thing to do. It's healthy masculinity. We're going to get rid of that toxic masculinity and just have healthy masculinity. So tune into that if you can. If you're interested to hear more about what I do, you can head to my website. So it's www.mindful-men.com.au. And that links to my social media. So I'm all over social media and the Mindful Men podcast, where we talk about conversations just like this every single week. So join me over there if you can. Definitely subscribe to this show. Win yourself $100. And again, Ernest, thanks so much for having me on the show.
Simon. Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. I stopped talking and then I thought I'm just better turn myself off, so just be staring at the camera.
No, you're fine. I'm glad that so I use StreamYard and now they have this. They added where you can like take things out, so I'll be able to take that out. So,
it might make for a good TikTok video. So just me staring there.
Right. So I'm going to just like act like I was still here, right? And do the ending and take us out, and then I'll just take that part out later. Yep. So just play along with me, right? Yep. Okay. All right. So thank you very much, Simon. We can't end it no better than that. To my listeners, thank you guys for tuning in to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast, where my mission is to help you to deal, heal, and to fulfill, to deal with your problems, to heal from the pain, and to fulfill your purpose. So until next time, you guys be blessed. Hey guys, I know you're enjoying the podcast. However, don't forget to join our text line at 866-326-0730. That's 866-326-0730 in order to receive text messages with new events and things that is going on and new episodes as they release. All right, see you in a minute. Thanks for listening to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. Remember to listen, like, subscribe, and share. This episode has been brought to you by Deal to Heal Teas. Put some inspiration in your situation. Wear an inspirational tea and be inspired all day. Let's go to dealtohealteas.myshopify.com. Remember, our mission is to help you to deal, heal, and fulfill. Deal with your problem, heal from the pain, and fulfill your purpose. Thanks for listening.